Okay, now I think you can hear and see me. I forgot to hit the go live. Everybody there? Hi, Tanil. Hi, Voon. How are you guys? Okay. Oh, I see the notice on YouTube just went up. Okay, so that's good. How's everybody doing? I have no makeup on. I'm sorry. I showered just a little while ago and I thought I'm not putting on makeup again to take it off to put on my moisturizer. So this is it. If anybody can hear me, if y'all can just drop a little comment down below. I see, I don't know what my volume is set at. Can you hear me, Voon, if you're there? I have to learn how to figure out the gain on this. Let me put it in there. Ah, there's Voon. Hi, Voon. How are you? I hope you had a really good week. Sorry about last week. Tanil, you see and hear me. That's wonderful. Hi. I did foolish last week. I was up in the middle of the night. I was having a hard time sleeping, and I thought, okay, I'm going to have a little bit of protein, and I didn't have anything prepared in advance. So I thought, oh, you know what? I'm doing well with eating really smushed up beans. So I thought, okay, I'll take a little bit of tuna, mix it with mayo to make it very moist, and smush it really, really fine. But no, that didn't work. Had 6 hours of really bad pain, and then discomfort for quite a while after that. So I'm glad to be back. So we've got two of us here now, and I don't know, maybe we want to wait, another minute or two before we get started, see if anybody else shows up. I'm sorry if attendance is going to be down because I wasn't here last week. Hopefully it'll pick up again then as I'm more regular, making sure I'm showing up for the live streams. I do have all of Tanil's questions typed up again for us. I find that helpful, so I hope that helps everybody else too. And I'm really so excited to talk this week about those 2 chapters because boy, oh boy. Whoa, Tanil, you really picked a doozy of a book. I mean, my goodness, the stuff is just coming out of nowhere. Yeah, Boone is saying these chapters were doozies. Yeah, they sure were, weren't they? It went in a totally different direction than I expected it to go. And I mean, such shocking developments, no? Wow. Okay. So I see we're live on YouTube, so I'm going to close the YouTube tab I've got over here. If anybody wants to come on screen, I know it's harder for Tanil until she gets internet, but hopefully that'll be soon. But Voon, if you want to come on, since you're like a regular participant in live streams, let me know. We'll put you up here and you can say hi. Tanil, never worry about falling behind. We're just glad you're here with us and that you're able to connect. That's really awesome. I'm glad for whatever degree that your weather is cooperating and that you have some sort of a connection. That's great. Voon, you want to tell us a little bit about your week, or shall I get started so it's not running so late for everybody else? You know what? I'll put up the first question, and we can talk about it, or we can wait, or we can see if anybody else joins us. And the first one that Neil raised was, what do you think Hannah expected when she asked Eva if she ever loved them? Thank you. I'm so glad, Tanil, that you're going to be getting internet soon. That will be that'll be so nice for you. No, I mean, you're terrific in that you're publishing your videos so regularly, especially the treadmill ones. And I mean, you've got a great track record with that one on your channel. I'm really proud of you. And how much easier everything is going to be for you now when you've got internet right to your door, thankfully. That'll be wonderful. Okay. I should have brought some water. I didn't. Okay. What do you think Hannah expected when she asked Eva if she ever loved them? Okay, Voon said, I wasn't surprised by the question. I wanted to know myself. Yeah, that really was quite the question, no? I wonder, like, if Eva was asking, like, clearly, no, not Eva, clearly Hannah knew that there was, like, maternal, quote unquote, love in the sense that her mother cared for her and raised them and did the best she could to provide for them. But I think she was looking for that more tender, emotional connection that maybe was missing with Eva. Tennille says, I think she expected kind of what she got. She knew her mother was hoping, she knew her mother, but was hoping for more. Yeah, I agree with you. Like I'm thinking, just this morning, last week, one of the good days that I had was taking our younger son, and he's 19, and we went and bought him a new set of rollerblades with, the helmet and the kit, the protectors and stuff like that. And so this early morning, he and I went for a drive to a parking lot to find something smooth for him to practice on, because it's been years. He didn't fall once, but still he was a bit wobbly. And I was thinking, like, on the way there, we were listening to his music and singing a bit together and joking around. And I think that's maybe a bit of the difference of what Hannah was hinting towards. Like, her mother was there to physically meet their needs, but it seems like emotionally something was missing in that connection. Boone says, I think that too, Tennille, that Hannah was hoping for more in the experience, a connection with her mother. I'll get some water soon, Tennille, if I need it. Thank you. God bless you, love. You guys are so sweet. Thank you. When I need it, I'll go get it. Thank you very much. Yeah, it does seem like a lot was missing over there in terms of that, like, a bonding, So Tennille then says, why did Hannah choose this time to question Eva's love and then ask about Plum's death? What do you ladies think about that one? And Boone comments that, yeah, we can definitely see that was something was missing in their relationship, right? And hang on, you know what? Wait a minute, wait. I'm gonna get rid of that one. I clearly have to practice here, ladies. I'm sorry. Figure out how to delete the open comments. One day I'm going to try to take, when I do this, a little video to show you guys what it looks like on StreamYard. Boone, I don't know if you've used it before. When you type in all these questions, you have this long scrolling list. But it's not like, like on Facebook, let's say when you get a new comment, it'll be, let's say, bold. But once you've looked at it, it goes to like a less noticeable color of a font, right? So you can tell what you've read, what you haven't. StreamYard doesn't do that. So when I'm scrolling through all of the questions, which I haven't numbered, maybe I ought to do that, it's harder for me to tell which was the last one I put up here. Okay, so why did Hannah choose this time to question Eva's love and ask about Plum's death? So Tennille shares, my son used to go skateboarding. Those were fun times, but I was always on the edge of my seat, worried about him getting hurt. Yeah, for sure, right? I think that's just something, as parents, you're always thinking and worrying, what if something goes wrong, But, I mean, what I've tried to show our boys, I mean, when I was a little girl, I was very much a tomboy, out there in nature and, climbing trees and traipsing along the river, climbing over rocks, all sorts of things that I maybe should not have been doing. And I wasn't supervised well enough to make sure I wasn't. But, I mean, I got my cuts and scrapes and this and that, and I just, brushed them off and kept on going. And I think as long as the injuries and, God forbid, something major, right, the rest is just sort of par for the course, and we learn from it. But we still get nervous, right? Boone says, okay, now this threw me off. I was totally confused. Did Plum try to get busy with his mom? I totally don't understand. She was saying, okay, a grown man trying to get back into the womb. I was so lost. Okay. So is that why she killed him? So confused. And Tennille says, I think on a subconscious level, she was wanting fulfillment she didn't get. from her physical affairs. She didn't bond with Sula and didn't feel a part of a family. She was searching. Okay, I think this is Tennille going back and talking about Hannah, right? Is this what you mean, Tennille? Talking about Hannah wasn't bonding with Sula and she didn't feel a part of a family. She was searching for that bond with her mother, Eva. Is that what you're referring to? But Voon brings up a good question that she was very confused with Plum actually really trying to have some sort of a physical relationship with his mother, if I'm understanding you correctly, Voon. And that's why Eva killed him, because it was so inappropriate. So, let me think here. That's interesting, Voon, what you're bringing up. I didn't pick up on that Plum was pursuing that type of a actual physical sexual relationship with his mother. I think it was more that Eva was overwhelmed in that she saw her son in some ways regressing to be so dependent on her, and that he, in a sense, was going to like suck the lifeblood out of her. Just like when we have a child growing in our womb, it's attached to us, to our bloodstream, our entire body, right? So I wonder if she felt that he was just so demanding in the care that he needed that it would go beyond not just the physical, but also to the more real existential. Boy, I'm not explaining that well. That he was going to just take everything out of her soul, everything he could possibly get. Tennille says, no, Plum did not try to have sex with her. It was a metaphor for his childlike helplessness. And Voon says, yeah, this just threw me all off. And Tennille says, that's what I think anyway. I agree with you, Tennille. I don't think it was the pursuit of a sexual relationship. I think he was just so overwhelmed, and maybe in some sense he wanted to regress so far that he could kind of like start life over again, fresh, wipe out everything that had happened. But that was just too much for Eva to bear. She had been, I think, holding on for so long, trying to take care of so many people as best as she possibly could, that maybe she felt utterly drained and had no more to give, and she was afraid that this was going to be the end of her, all of his neediness. And so Tennille says, okay, just got lost in the narrative. And yeah, it's easy to get lost in the narrative. There are so many twists and turns. We don't really see what's coming up, do we? Let me see where I am with the next question. Okay, so Tennille says, how did Eva's confession affect Hannah and influence her actions later? So how did Eva's confession, I guess here, technically we sort of kind of maybe have a couple of confessions going on, right? We have the confession that no, she didn't love Hannah in the way that Hannah wanted her to, that it was a very different type of love. It was a very practical one, but maybe also Eva is in a sense confessing as well too to the fact that she killed Plum. So how did this confession on Eva's part affect Hannah and influence Hannah's later actions? What do you guys think about that? I think Hannah was just simply devastated by the confession that her mother never loved her more than to just practically provide for her and meet her needs. But at the same time, with what we learn happens next, well, that depends, of course, if we think, and the question is going to come up soon from Tennille, if we think what happened with Hannah was planned or if it was accidental. But if it were planned on Hannah's part, that's very, very interesting, because then, in a sense, if Hannah felt she wasn't getting real love from her mother, Hannah's intentional demise would be showing a tremendous lack of love for Sula as well too. And so we'll be sort of showing like a historical behavior pattern over here in the family. Tennille says Eva's nightmare was to have Plum regress until he was totally helpless. Yes, I think so too. And Voon says maybe if Eva was different with Hannah, Hannah would have not been so quick to be physical with men. That could very well be true. That's right. That she was looking for some sort of an emotional connection that wasn't being fulfilled at home with her mother, with her family. And Tennille says, I agree, Voon. It says she wanted a little touching every day. I don't think that it had to be sex, but that's all she found. Yeah, and that's all she found, because I think at the same time, while she wanted that physical connection, I think on some level, perhaps subconsciously, maybe not consciously, Hannah recognized that the bond that she was looking for was not a physical one. I mean, there could have been physicality to a loving relationship with a partner, but I think she realized on some level that the bond she wanted could not be fulfilled by a male partner, because that's not what was missing mostly for her. What was missing was that maternal love that she didn't get, and no man would be able to provide that one. So I think that's also one of the reasons why she had such short-lived, very casual relationships, because she couldn't risk the constant hurt that that emotional bond was going to be fulfilled or not fulfilled through that relationship. So, yeah. No, you think maybe that had something to do with it, Boone? She must have just been so lonely on so many different levels. But I think what's very interesting about this, and this is something that in many of the books I choose to read, or occasionally the films or TV series that I will choose to watch, whether it's on YouTube or on Netflix, revolve around the fact of repetitive sort of trauma in families, or how one individual's trauma can then, through nature and nurture, be brought about to be experienced by the next generation and the generation thereafter. Because we see here that Hannah was very clearly impacted by her mother's behavior and aloofness. And now we're seeing also that Sula is being impacted as well too, particularly if it was the case that Hannah decided to bring about her own death. Hey, Eden, hello. So nice to see you. I'm so glad you're joining us, dear. I hope everything is going well with you, sweetie. We're just at the point, Eden, where we're talking about how Hannah had asked Eva if Eva ever loved her when she was, well, even now. And Eva says no, she provided for them, but she didn't love them the way that Hannah wanted to. So we're questioning if this was influential on Hannah's behavior. And Voon is saying loneliness or the lack of something really does make a person do things. That's very true. And let me see, where's the next question? I really am going to number the questions next time, I think, guys, so I can right away find which one that we were on. I'm so sorry. Yes, okay, so Tennille then went to talk about the fact that Hannah, after this conversation with her mother, where Eva confesses that no, she never really loved her in the way that Hannah wanted to be loved. She was provided for practically with food and shelter, but that emotional bond is missing. So we come to this scene where then Hannah is enjoying the simple washing of the beans. And it's sort of like reminiscent of the fact that, as Tennille points out, Eva was talking about, hey, I provided beans for you. Remember the beans, how much I struggled, and now we've got bushels of beans and you're well taken care of. So we see Hannah sort of like lost in thought, and she just seems to be enjoying the washing of these beans. So Tennille says, what does the simple enjoyment of the chore of washing the beans say about Hannah's state of mind after discussing with Eva, one, that she really isn't loved by her, and two, bringing up Plum's death? And then after that, we're going to talk about what is then the significance of Hannah's dream of wedding in a red dress, especially after her conversation with Eva. And what do you think was really on her mind when she was washing the beans? I think that Hannah was probably thinking back to her mother talking about how beans were um, sort of like the physical actualization of the love she had for her children. It was very physical, practical love that she offered them, right? She offered them shelter, they were clothed, they had food to eat. And so these beings are like a physical representation of what that love is. But what Hannah was really striving for was that emotional love, whether it's conveyed through a smile or a shared understanding with facial expressions or a hug and loving touches, which we know that Hannah has been seeking out a little bit of touching every day with the men that she has these very casual, intimate sexual relationships with, but that's the extent of their involvement, right? So Tennille says, I think Hannah was zoned out while her subconscious tried to sort out what had just happened. Yeah, that Hannah was trying to maybe process what her mother had said. That no, you weren't loved in the way that Hannah really craves it, but in the sense you were loved, i.e., taken care of. Savoon says, I think that Hannah just feels hurt and let down. I imagine that must be like a real crushing blow to a child. And I think even though Hannah is an adult right now with a child of her own, I think the connection that we have with our parents and our mothers in particular is such that no matter what age we are at, if we hear something so devastating as no, I didn't love you, or we experience something with them that shows us that we are not their first priority, that we can have a childlike response to that, because at the very core, in that relationship with our mother, we will forever be the child, even though we might both be adult women, as clearly Eva and Hannah are. Hannah is still responding to her mother. You are the mother, I am the child. You are to look after me, you are to love me. So Tennille says maybe she was questioning if that actually changed anything, not that she knew. And Tennille, right. And then Tennille goes on to says that the dream of the wedding with Hannah in the red dress was like an omen of her coming death, in my opinion. Yeah, a very scary omen. I don't, I'm not sure. I don't really know too much about dream analysis. I tend to take a literal look, I guess, at dreams more often than not when I do remember them. So I'm not sure what the relationship is between a wedding and an upcoming death. So I don't know if either anybody here can elaborate on that, Neil or Voon or Eden, if you have any thoughts on that. Certainly, the color red would seem to indicate injury or loss of life, simply because of its relationship to the lifeblood. I didn't understand the imagery, though, of the wedding. I would have thought the wedding would signify like a new beginning or a new life, and perhaps it does in the sense that it's going to be a new life in the here beyond, perhaps. Boone shares, I like your views, Tennille. Yeah, Tennille was very insightful. I love very much what she shares with us. Let me put that question back up there. Yeah, so we were talking. Okay, sorry. I'm going to try to get better at finding these questions. What is the significance of Hannah's dream of a wedding in a red dress, especially after her conversation with Eva? And what do we really think was on her mind when she was washing the beans? So Tennille shares that the dream was an omen of the upcoming death of Hannah. And then Tennille raises another question. We're told that there are going to be a couple of strange things going on. So what do we think the strange thing of the wind portended? What do we think this wind represented? It promised rain in the sense of changing the weather pattern, bringing something fresh in, maybe bringing rain to nourish the ground, but instead it brought drought and it brought dryness. So what did this bring? Oh my word. What did this wind bring and what did it signify? So I remember Tennille saying in her video that maybe it was sort of like a wind of change. Something was coming. And Voon shares that when I think about a wedding, I think about fairy tales or happiness. Yes, or like new beginnings, fresh starts, a new life. Um, and Voon says fairy tales are not real. Tennille shares that it talks about Eva and Hannah knowing instantly what page in the dream book the answer was. Wedding equals death and red equals fire. Oh, okay. So red. See, I was thinking originally that the red represented blood, as in the lifeblood is gone or draining out. But yes, for sure, representing fire. And wedding equals death. That's very, very interesting. I wonder how that originated, where that comes from. That a wedding dress or a wedding in a dream is associated with impending death or the death of somebody. Yeah. So, what do we think that this strange wind was bringing with it, or pretending? What was it going to blow into their lives, as it were? Promising rain, that's what everyone was hoping for, but instead it brought the opposite. It brought more drought and more dryness. And Tennille shares that yes, it was one of the strange things listed in the chapter. So if Toni Morrison listed it as a strange thing, really bringing it to our attention, right? Like many of the revelations in this book have come about unexpectedly out of nowhere. And yet here the author is plainly saying this is a strange thing. So why was it so strange that this wind was coming? Winds, I guess, usually bring about a real change in the weather, in the atmosphere, stir things up. That's all very simplistic, though, in terms of its imagery. I like what Tennille was suggesting instead, that maybe that's like a wind of change. There's going to be a dramatic shift in what's taking place over here, not just superficially in what we see, but in also what's going to be taking place in their lives, in the narrative. And Tennille shares many dream interpretations are opposite or relating to tarot cards and their symbolism, which is something else I know absolutely nothing about. I'm sure it's very interesting, but I really am not at all familiar with any of that, what the symbolism is. Maybe I should learn a little bit more about it. Maybe that would be something very interesting to look into. Okay. So then we go on to, somebody had a comment. Let me go back. And Tennille shares also, the wind was a disappointment, like Eva's reveal of her true feelings. That's very true. Yeah, perhaps Eva, clearly Hannah was very, very brave when she just out and out asked her mother. Can you imagine being a daughter and asking your mother a question like that? Maybe suspecting from your mother's behavior or the lack thereof all of this time that she doesn't really love you, but you're going to ask because you're hoping against all hope that maybe she's going to say, well, yes, of course I do. This is how I show it. I show it differently, but of course I love you more than anything else. I would do anything for you. But instead, Eva gets this real blow that's in the opposite direction of exactly what it was, not only that she wanted, but that she felt she really needed to have. Hello, Lousy, you're on the ferry. I hope you have a fun ferry ride. It's so nice to see you here, sweetheart. So glad you're joining us, listening in. And that was a kiss, by the way. Since you're only listening, that's what that little sound was. Everybody is saying hi to you. Voon is saying hi. And Tennille is saying hi. Glad you're here. Eden is saying hi to you as well. We've got some heart emojis. So really glad to have you joining us, Lousy. And we hope you're doing well and all is going good for you. And we're at the point now in our convo where, I shouldn't put my hand on there, should I? Could make a racket. Blah, blah, blah. Tennille's question. What do you think Sula's pestering and sulking behavior indicated? When she was going around the house pestering people, particularly the three Deweys, and is this just sort of like, normal early adolescent behavior where hormones are raging and, one's questioning, wait a second, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm turning into an adult, but I'm not really an adult. And, we've got a lot going on at that time, right? So is this just sort of like normal teenage sort of like angst that Sula is experiencing and expressing, or is it something else? Is her behavior a cry for attention, or is she pushing her boundaries? What do we think about that, guys? What Sula is behaving like? Okay, Vuna's going back to the question where we're talking about one of the strange things that Toni Morrison, as the author, mentions in this chapter. She's talking about this wind. And instead of the wind bringing rain, it brings drought and it brings dryness instead. So Vuna is saying, I didn't know what to think about the wind because there are so many things. So many good changes or bad changes. So what was there to expect? We didn't know, right? And Tennille is now talking about Young has a lot to say about dream symbolism as well. But I'm quite sure Eva's book wasn't that kind of dream interpretation. Right. Okay. So what Tennille is commenting on now, little Aussie, is that we were talking a couple of minutes ago about Hannah's dream that almost seems like, or maybe was, an omen of what was to come, where she dreamt that she was in a wedding dress and the wedding dress was red. So we know that Eva's dream book, which was perhaps, as Tennille's suggesting, not as psychologically insightful as, let's say, the interpretations of dreams by Carl Jung, but instead maybe more simplistic, maybe more attached to folklore or traditions handed down through generations. But we're referring back to the dream where Hannah maybe had an omen of what was to either occur accidentally, when God forbid she burns to death, or was it instead Hannah subconsciously working things through in her mind and then planning how she would bring about her own demise? That's going to be something that we're coming up to soon. So we're taking a look for a minute at Sula's behavior. And was she just seeking attention? Was she pushing her boundaries when she was being pestering and sulking with other people? And I'm sure, Sula's developing from a child into a young woman slowly but surely, right? And I think as much as, let's say, parents, grandparents, family members try to keep the lowdown on problems within the home or strained emotions or relationships, kids are generally very, very intuitive. So I'm sure if Hannah was still emotionally reeling from what Eva said about not loving her, that Sula would have been picking up on her mother's emotions along the way. And surely Sula would have been hearing about her mother's behavior, having these, one day, one night, sexual relationships with various men. So Sula must have been in an awful lot of emotional conflict as well, too. Like she's growing into the role of a young woman, but what is that role supposed to be? Who is she supposed to emulate over here? Is she supposed to emulate Eva, who doesn't love her children, or Hannah, who is choosing to have these very, very casual flings with men, but doesn't have an established relationship? So I'm sure there's an awful lot going on in Eva's mind. And so Tennille says, I really could go either way with Sula's behavior. Maybe she is showing signs of being disturbed, or maybe just being a bratty teenager. And for sure, it could even be a mix of both, right? And Voon shares, I think Sula wanted attention. And Tennille says, yes, Voon, any kind of attention, negative or positive. And I think that's very true of children who are neglected by their family members. And we're not talking about physical neglect here, because I think to a large degree, children, let's say in very poor households, but who know that they are loved and cared for to the best of their parents' abilities, can still come out and thrive through their adolescence and through their young adulthood into adulthood, because they know that they themselves have worth. Whereas in this case over here, Eva has shown that she provides physically for Hannah, but that emotionally she's not there, that the love is missing. And that can be a real crushing blow to a child, right? So Voon is saying that's right, that any kind of attention is better than none at all. That's right. So if Sula isn't going to be getting attention because she has worth, then she's going to get attention because she is just, raising hell, as it were. And that's a very, very sad thing to do. She's just desperate for somebody to notice her and to feel some sort of an emotion towards her. And if that emotion isn't going to be love, then it's going to have to be the opposite of that, or a mixture of anger or dislike. Tennille says, also she is seeing what happens and how others react to her, perhaps wondering what she can get away with. This is where we're talking about Sula over here, trying things out to see if she can get away with things, what the limits are, what the boundaries are that others are maybe going to impose on her. And then we see whether or not she's going to test them and try to push beyond them. Okay. So next, what do you think of Eva's behavior jumping out of the window when she sees Hannah burning, right? We have Eva, who has only her one good leg, and she's up on another story of the building. And instead of her thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to go hobble down the stairs and I'm going to go out, run out the front to Hannah, instead she takes a very, very dramatic move, and she goes to the window and she jumps out of it, falls to the ground, injures herself. So what do we think of this behavior on Eva's part, where instead of being slow and cautious and getting down those stairs without injuring herself unduly, she decides to take a much more direct and dramatic approach and jump out the window, trying to get to Hannah as quickly as possible? So Tennille is mentioning here that many sociopaths watch others' behavior to emulate it because they don't have reactions like other people. Yes, that's very true. That's very true. Because they are emotionally disconnected and they don't feel the same way that other individuals do. You're right. They watch to see how should they behave and act in a given situation, because it doesn't come to them naturally. So again, what do we think of Eva jumping out of the window when she saw that Hannah was burning? And at the same time, do we think that Hannah catching herself on fire was an accident, or was this a deliberate act? And again, this goes back to the dream, right? Do we think that the dream of her in the wedding dress and the red dress was an omen of things to come, that she had some sort of like a vision that her death was imminent and that this was an accident? Or was it instead the subconscious sort of plotting how she could end her pain, and she brought about this her own death? So Voon says, I think I would have done the same thing, just trying to get to Hannah. So Voon is saying she thinks that what Eva was doing was trying to figure out the fastest way to get to Hannah, and if that was going out the window, so be it. That was exactly what she was going to do. And I think I agree with you over there. And what is very interesting, is how soon this happens after the conversation where she is sharing with Hannah, no, I took care of you practically and I never loved you. And yet here she is risking her own life because she doesn't know how she's going to fall out of the window, or she might, break her neck, break her back. She doesn't know she's going to even cause lesser injury to herself, break her one good leg. And here she is, she's just going straight for it, jumping out of that window to try to get to Hannah as quickly as possible. Which is certainly really very interesting behavior for somebody who just recently said, no, I don't love you. And yet she's acting in a very selfless and loving manner. Moon says, I don't know what to think about the fire. I think Hannah knew better, but this happened anyway. It just puzzles me. And Eden shares that I think she wants to learn to trust and love someone, but she doesn't know how. The girl who found out her mom doesn't love her. Yeah. Hannah does want to learn to trust and to love someone, but she doesn't know how because she's discovering her mother didn't love her. And certainly that's one of the, well, next to our fathers, but certainly with our mothers, that's our first understanding, right? Even on a subconscious level of what love is. And while for sure we understand that there's the practical aspect of it, right? The physical taking care of the baby, feeding the baby, changing the baby, keeping it warm. There's also the emotional, right? There's the lulling it to sleep, there's the looking in its eyes, there's the kind, loving words, the stroking, things like that, that then gives that emotional bond that she was missing. That was very, very painful for Hannah to hear, that her mom didn't love her. Tennille says, how can I relate to Eva even in this? I always think of her as a son murderer. This character tears me up. Eva, why? That's true, right? We see that Eva murders Plum, and yet at the same time, she's risking everything to jump out of the window to save Hannah. So what's the difference here? What's going on? Boone shares, I get so confused over it. And Tennille says, good point, Eden. That was a great point, that the girl who finds out her mom doesn't love her, doesn't know who to trust, right? And wants someone to love her and for her to love too. Boone says, the idea Hannah burns in a fire just like Plum, that just gets me too. Yeah, that was very, very interesting. That's the one thing that kind of makes me wonder if there was some intent on Hannah's part, because it's kind of like showing, you know what, Eva, you took away your son's life so casually with this, and that didn't seem like a very loving act. You were preserving yourself. You couldn't give any more to him to keep him going through his terrible experiences and his unwellness. And here it is, I'm going to take myself away from you through a seemingly casual, senseless accident, right? I find that very interesting too, that she dies by fire as well also. Moon is also saying, yes, Ian, that's a very good view. And Tennille shares, do you think Eva felt guilty when she jumped out of the window? That's a really great question, Tennille. And Boone is sharing maybe a small part. And feeling guilty, that she could be feeling guilty about a whole lot here, right? I guess on the surface level, we're thinking, okay, did she feel guilty that maybe if this was an intentional act, or even if it was accidental, because let's say Hannah was distracted, maybe because she's in so much emotional pain by what Eva said. So maybe Eva feels guilt that she's responsible, that this occurs with Hannah because of what she recently disclosed, that she didn't love her. And or is she also feeling guilt here now too, that she intentionally killed her first son, her son, the first child she lost through fire, and now the second one is being lost through fire. Whether or not there's like a punishment over there, and it's such a blatant punishment perhaps because they are both killed through fire. And then afterwards we see that Eva uses the term perfection of judgment. So what do we think the term perfection of judgment means as Eva applies it to herself? So I think over here the perfection is in that, well, one is obviously, to me anyway, with the fire, in that she intentionally killed Plum with the fire, and now here Hannah is dying with the fire as well. It is just so blatantly obvious that she took one and the other one is being taken from her. Now, whether it's taken through accident or whether Hannah is the one taking herself away from her mother, but there's just like such a direct connection between the two that this is an obvious related loss. It's a punishment for what was carried out against Plum, in my mind. So let's hear. Tennille is saying that she burned one child and so had to see the other burn as well. Yeah, that is like perfect judgment, isn't it? Yeah, I find, I mean, I'm just sharing experiences over here. I don't mean to discuss religion or anything like that. But I mean, there have been times in my life where later on in adulthood, I then experienced something that I judged in somebody else at an earlier time. And it was only by going through that experience myself that I was able to see how wrong my judgment was. So clearly here there's a very direct punishment for Eva. You took away Plum, now Hannah is being taken away, or Hannah is taking herself away. And Boone says, I don't honestly know how to answer this one. It's certainly open to interpretation. What is this perfection of judgment? Yeah. And then also, I mean, this is really very, very like, oh boy, right? What is our impression of Sula in this final scene where she is watching Hannah burn? Is she showing shock, or is this detached interest in what's going on? Now, there is a really scary thought, isn't there, right? Tennille continues to say, also the burning of her children, Eva's children, they were bookends on her life. After that, she went upstairs. Ooh, that's really, really good. I really like that, Tennille. That's very insightful. Yes. Yeah, very, very insightful. Bookends on her life. That's very good. Yes. So, what's our impression of what's going on with Sula as she's standing there and she's seeing her own mother burning, and she doesn't do anything. She's just standing and watching. Now, clearly, as Tennille has suggested, right, that can simply be shock because she is just frozen, right? There's the fight or flight syndrome that we know about, right? So what is going on here? Is she just sort of like frozen like a deer in the headlights, as it were? She can't believe what she's seeing. She doesn't know what to do. She's so fearful of what's going on that she's frozen to the spot. And yet, Eva's questioning what she thinks she sees in Sula. That it seemed more like a spark. I guess I'm using the word spark because we're talking about fire. A spark of real interest in watching what was happening to Hannah over here. There's this cold detachment as well here too, right? Boone says, I think she had a detached interest, just watching and not reacting. That's right, yeah. Tennille says, maybe Hannah was trying to control her own destiny instead of living in fear of her mother's cruel judgment and sentences. Yeah, that could be true. Saying, okay, I'm going to live and die on my own terms, and it's not going to be you. Very, very true. Yeah, and going back to the question about Sula's behavior, where Boone says, I think she had a detached interest, just watching Hannah burn and not reacting to it. And that's very, very frightening, no? Yeah, because, I mean, we have, there's so much going on here, right? We have Sula's grandmother burning her uncle, and Eva goes up the stairs. I'm like, what do you mean? Oh, Plum's burning? Kind of, okay. And now, very on the opposite end of the the spectrum very dramatically. Eva jumping out of a window to go and try to save Hannah. And Sula must certainly be wondering what's going on, right? There's this aloofness and detachment on her grandmother's part in terms of how she's treating her own daughter. There's no love there. And yet, at the same time, the physical behavior attests almost to something else. Tennille's saying, maybe Hannah was trying to, that's right, control her own destiny instead of living in fear of her mother's cruel judgment and sentences. And Voon says, wow, what a way to control your own destiny. I could not set myself on fire. Her mind had been so powerful to do that. Yeah. I think also, Voon, like when you say that, I think also there are times when people can be in so much emotional pain that physical pain almost seems like a relief to it, because it so distracts from the emotional pain that it's almost soothing in comparison, as terrible as that sounds. Tennille says, I was disturbed by Sula's behavior because it was atypical. Tennille's talking about how like a monk would burn himself in protest. And Boone is sharing, I just can't fathom the short lives of Plum and Hannah. Yeah, it was very, very, very awful. The whole thing. No, the whole thing is disturbed. Hannah, if she's intentionally catching herself on fire, if it is accidental, then such a horrific death, mimicking the death of her brother. Eva's behavior, seeming to be really like hot and cold almost, You would think that most parents, even if they didn't really feel love towards their children, they would try to sort of like couch or pad that answer to the question in a way that it would be less hurtful. But no, Eva's blunt and very direct. No, didn't love you like that. Not at all. There's not even enough concern for her child's experience of what she's saying to try to phrase it differently in a way that wouldn't hurt so much. She seems to be either totally oblivious or totally uncaring of the fact of the wounding that those words will do. So I don't know if somebody wants to say something else on this. The whole thing is just really gruesome. Really, really gruesome. And I wonder, was there anything to, I don't think so, but might there have been anything at all to Sula being frozen to the spot and watching, not only because she was interested in what her mother's experience of burning would be, but also because she was interested in watching the dynamic unfold at such a horrible instance between Eva and her mother? Was she hoping to see, that there really is love there? When Tennille shares, and all these disturbing things during Sula's formative teenage years, right? And Boone shares, you just don't know what to expect next with Eva. And Tennille says that yes, Eva certainly didn't try to be tactful with her answers. No, she wasn't at all concerned with the damage that her answers would be causing somebody else, which is also quite sociopathic, right? In terms of behavior, sort of like I'm going to be me. I'm going to share who I am, whether that's painful to somebody else or not. I live my life my way. They're responsible for living their life their way and for what their emotions are. So I'm just being me. I'm just sharing what's my experience and being brutally honest, right? Very, very awful that she couldn't at least have tried to phrase that lack of love in a manner that would be less hurtful. And Tennille says maybe Sula was watching everyone else to see their reaction to Hannah's death. I was wondering that a little bit, if Sula was waiting to see if no, there really is love over here, that, you know, maybe behavior in ordinary everyday life doesn't reveal everything, but in a extremely horrific and stressful instance like this where her mother is burning, maybe that's where Eva's true feelings would be shown. Maybe that's what Sula was hoping for, that there was a really love over there. I don't know. Very, very interesting. So, unless somebody has something else to say, I'm going to move on now to Neil's next question, which takes us to a completely different scene. Let me go back and check what the comment is. Eva was like, "You're alive, ain't you?" And Hannah's answer was clear. "It's not enough." And that's very, very true, right? Being physically alive, but emotionally bereft inside, right? Emotionally empty. Very, 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 very insightful. Yeah. And I think what's very interesting here, too, as well, is how Toni Morrison brings about this new juxtaposition now. We're moving from Hannah's dream of the wedding dress all in red, and now we're moving on to Nell's wedding, right? And so Tennille asks us, what is it about Nell's wedding that makes the house's immaculate appearance less important to Helene this time? Right? Usually Helene is very, like, everything has to be totally proper, very organized, very everything in its place, immaculate. And this time instead there seems to be a lighter, more jovial feeling, less attention to the perfection of the scene at the wedding. So what do we think is going on with that? Anybody's thoughts? And you excuse me for a second. My nose feels a bit runny. It isn't, but it feels that way. I really don't know what to make of this one. I really don't. I mean, maybe that wind of change that was coming along was bringing change in so many different areas. Was it bringing a change with Helene too? Was Helene's heart somehow lightened in that her daughter was going to be marrying? So hard to say. I really don't have much to comment on this one. So let's see what someone else has to share on this one. So Tennille is saying, well, partly she is tipsy, going on drunk. Yes, that'll definitely make a difference, I guess. But even the fact that she allows herself, right? That's interesting that she even allows herself to get tipsy or a little bit drunk. Because usually people, I think, who are almost OCD-like in their attention to detail, everything has to be just, will also be very careful in public venues that their behavior is just, right? My thinking is that somebody who is very concerned about the appearance that they give all the time, if they are going to be drinking to the point of being tipsy or even drunk, they were much more likely to do it in private, where nobody can then question their behavior or judge them for not being just so. And instead here we see this loosening in front of others, right? Tennille says, I think her job is over and she can see a lonely future. Okay, so it's interesting in that we're seeing many women over here, certainly with the older generation, I would think, with Eva, and now here with Nell's mother, where it's like the women are living to fulfill a role, right? The role of mother, protector, provider. But outside of that, maybe they don't know 100% who they are. and they fear that they're going to be lonely without that role to fill. They don't know what role comes next or if there's even going to be one, which is something I think that a number of us, I mean, I know Eden and Lilausi, if you're listening, you guys are at the start of your lives, but when you get to be, I'm going to say, early middle aged, let's say, like myself, or very, very young, at the cusp of early middle age, like Tennille and maybe Voon, that you start thinking already like, hey, when my children are out of the house, it's going to be quiet and I'm not going to have the same role that I had before. Who am I going to be? What am I going to be about? So maybe you're right, Tennille. That might be what's going on over here. Eden says her only daughter's wedding and she wanted to join in the celebration. That makes sense too, Eden. That's right. I mean, this is going to be the one and only wedding in the family, and she's happy that her daughter now seems to have found somebody she's going to build a life with. That is a lot to celebrate. Thinking that your child is okay, they're going to go on in life, they're going to have someone to share everything with, they're going to build a life together. And for sure, that's tremendous cause for happiness. I agree with you with that. Yep. And Voon says, I agree with that, Tennille, very much. That maybe Nell's mother was foreseeing a lonely future without Nell in the house. Yeah. And Tennille is saying, true, Eden, maybe she just wanted to have a good time. Maybe celebrate her accomplishment. Look, I raised a fine daughter and she has this wonderful new husband and they're going to build a happy life together. It's quite an accomplishment. It's an accomplishment for her daughter, and it's an accomplishment for herself as well, too. And Tennille shares that maybe Helen has a bit of the empty nest syndrome. Goodness knows that I had it pretty bad for a couple of years. That can make you act out of character. Yeah. I don't know. I think about that all of the time with my two boys, Our oldest son, Sam, has been with his girlfriend now for over 6 years, going towards 7, and they know they're going to be building a life together, and there's talk of marriage, God willing, sometime next year. And I think, okay, he'll be out of the house. But then I find, I guess, a bit of reassurance in that when his younger brother and I talk about the fact that we already have plans for what we're going to do with his room, he's like very upset, like, what do you mean? You're not keeping my room so that when, Ruthie and I come over, we're sleeping over here, like the room is in place? And I said, well, have like this big couch bed or something that'll be in the room there for you, but otherwise it's going to be like an art studio, something like that. And oh, well, he says, so if my brother is going to move into my room and take it over, then what's going to happen with his bedroom? Maybe, Ruthie and I will use that one. I said, no, that one is going to, God willing, be for a nursery. See, so like I am already, I guess, in some ways anticipating this empty nest syndrome and thinking, okay, but God willing, I know my son and his girlfriend are staying in Montreal because all of her sisters are here. So I think, okay, they're going to be nearby. And his girlfriend is very sweet and she likes springtime. So that has reassured me that he's going to be sleeping somewhere else, making messes with his laundry somewhere else, and they'll still be around. Sorry for talking so much. Eden, you're saying, sorry, fat fingers, I left your answers. Tennille, she was tipsy. I didn't even notice that you had a typo there, Eden, so I don't know what you're referring to. Voon is sharing, my son is 19 and I dread the day he is ready to leave. I hear you, Voon. My youngest is 19 also. And I guess I'm fortunate in that we have 2 children. And okay, so when the older one moves out, there's still one at home. And okay, I can sort of like adjust slowly. It's not such an abrupt, oops, now you see him, now you don't kind of a thing. So now we go on to, would Jude Green have been as keen to marry Nell if he'd gotten a job building the new road? Now, I remember Tennille was talking in her video over here that perhaps he felt diminished as an adult man and that he couldn't get a job that he was clearly very well qualified for. He didn't, maybe have any other ideas what he was going to do for his future, and yet he wanted to establish himself as an adult man, as the head of a household, as somebody who can be there that others rely upon. So what Tennille is bringing up over here now, would Jude have been as eager to get married to Nell or to anyone else in particular if he had had that job and that job was fulfilling that need in him to feel like an adult man who was building his life? So did Nell over here act sort of like as a kind of like a compromise to his dreams, as it were? I can't have the job, so I'm going to have the wife. I'm going to build a home this way. I'm going to approach it from that angle, this adult manhood that he is seeking. Oh, okay, we're going back into Neil saying, I was sad, but so proud. I couldn't stay sad when Forrest left for good. Bittersweet. Sure, indeed. Yeah. Right? I mean, most of us who are healthy and well-adjusted, we want to do the best for our children, and we love them very much. But that love is also in the helping them learn to move on, right? To sending them out of the nest, as it were, because you want to see them building their own happy lives and being strong in their own confidence that they can take care of themselves. And and you hope you're still going to be there when they need to call or come over to have a chat, maybe for some advice or for some shared life experiences. But it's a good thing when you're able to love your child enough to let them go and then grow on their own, right? And Boone says, yet, right, Tennille, you must be so proud. Boone shares, I don't think Jude would have married her if he'd gotten the job. Right? That's a very sad thing, isn't it? No? I mean, it's sort of sad for him, but not really, because he could have decided, you know what, if I can't fulfill my dream this way, I'm going to have to find a job or something else to do that will do it, without then sort of selfishly fulfilling this need to be an adult male by marrying somebody who he doesn't necessarily love. And then here, right, we see that this ongoing pattern, in a sense, that people's dreams, real dreams for being loved and cared for, aren't being met. That they're getting sort of like this, I can't think of the word, not an imposter, but sort of like this substitute that is really lacking in the substance of what it is they need and want. Tennille shares, Forrest's old room is my crafty room now. Yeah, that's the plan that my younger son and I have for Sam's room. Yep. Sure, to an art studio, crafting room. Tennille shares, I think you are right, Boone, that it wasn't about Nell, but it was about his own self-esteem and his view of himself. And what a terrible thing for Nell. No, for someone to marry you because you are going to help fulfill somehow their image of themselves or pad their ego. But it's not about you. It's not because they love you and they really want to build a life with you. It's because they're anxious to get on with building their own life and they don't have any better option at the moment. So you'll do. It's sort of like the substitute. That's very, very sad. And Eden says, I agree, Voon, that Jude would not have married Nell if he had gotten a job. And that's very, very sad, isn't it? Like everybody here in one way or another is lacking the love that they really want or that they need. Boone is sharing your craft room is pretty cool, Tennille. Yeah, it really is. And Tennille does the most beautiful things in the craft room also. So let's go on to this question. What does the attraction to pain and the desire to help say about Nell? And what does it say about Nell and Jude's relationship? Right, that Nell seemed to be more interested in considering marrying Jude when she saw his tremendous disappointment and his pain at not being able to get the job he wanted and be the man who could then build a career, a solid job, and provide for himself and then a future family. What did that say? And I'm also going to post the next question here because it seems to be related, and then I'll go back to the comments. What about Ajax's quote about women? All they want is their own misery. And what does it say about the way men looked at women then and how people interact in relationships? So again, I'll go back. What does the attraction to pain and the desire to help say about Nell? And what does it say about Nell and Jude's relationship? So going back to the comments, Tennille shares that it said she was one of many, and he chose her because she was meekest. That's very, very sad. No, meek being manipulable, malleable certainly. And Boone shares, it is like too many people have to settle and is not what they really want. No, so many empty hearts here, one way or another. Tennille says, I think Nell was attracted to the damage in Jude, just like she was attracted to the damage in Sula. She saw a place she could fill, that she could complete someone. I think you're really onto something over there, that Nell could then get her sense of worth built up, not just being for, let's say, a pretty or proper object in her mother's, perfect world, but that here she would have internal worth as well too, not just the superficial, that by her being able to empathize and support and maybe save somebody else, she could technically save perhaps herself and that emptiness maybe that she felt inside, that she was maybe appreciated by her mother for what she represented, but not who she was in her essence, which is maybe why that relationship with Sula started off so successfully, because there were no artificial presentations between the two girls. It was what you see is what you get. And Tennille says she needed to be needed. Yeah, that's very, very true. Okay. So, again, what does the attraction to pain and desire and the desire to help say about Nell? And what does it say about Nell and Jude's relationship? That he found somebody who was meek. And I guess oftentimes they say that, right? That when somebody is damaged or lacking in some way, that others can pick up on that and then can either directly and consciously or subconsciously take advantage of that and use it to their own advantage. No? So Voon agrees with Tennille. Yes, Nell needed to be needed. And so what do we think about Ajax's quote about women, that all they want is their own misery? And what does it say about the way men looked at women then and how people interact in relationships? Yeah, I think oftentimes know that in relationships, often, and this is for sure, I'm missing the words again. Sorry. It's part of my fibro fog. Sometimes I just can't think of the right word. But you will often see that in relationships, that people will be attracted to one another for a host of reasons, right? There may be the physical and the emotional. You like the person's smile or the way they look. You then enjoy the way they behave, their sense of humor, what their interests are. But often, and this is discussed extensively, right, in psychology, there's this undercurrent in that we are often seeking a partner that will help put us in circumstances where we know we need to resolve something that we are carrying with us from the past, typically from our childhoods. And that this person will be the right person, in a sense, to push those buttons, to trigger those reactions, such that we hopefully, through our interaction and our relationship with them, be able to surmount whatever that obstacle was that we are carrying with us, and then be happier and stronger with them for their having helped us directly or indirectly to fulfill that need within ourselves to solve a past hurt or fill a void. Tennille shares, Nell's mother wanted to display her, Sula wanted to consume her, Jude just wanted to use her to prop up his ego. It was the lesser of the evils. Wow, eh? How very, very sad. There's so much sadness in this book. No? So much sadness. So many people seeking things they can't find or have. And finding very poor substitutions. The lesser of evils, that's very true. Boone shares, I think women can certainly create their own misery, but not intentionally. No. I don't think most people do create their own misery intentionally, no? But for some reason, some people seem to need that. And I wonder then, do you think when that misery is created unintentionally, it's because the person feels that on some level they were at fault for something in the past and they are deserving of punishment, and that's why they should be miserable and they shouldn't enjoy happiness? I wonder if there's something to that. I'm just going to reach up and adjust the camera a bit because I see, there we go. Now I won't be so low down over the banner. That hopefully looks better. That's a very good point, Drew. I don't think people create their own misery intentionally either, but sometimes you kind of wonder, no, is there this subconscious need that we are somehow punishing ourselves? Tennille says that I think Ajax thought he had it all figured out, but he was just a successful user and manipulator. And Boone shares, yes, like they don't deserve happiness or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I know we're talking about the book. I also know that sometimes Tennille has asked questions like, have you ever experienced this in life? And I think for a good part of my life, I often felt that I wasn't deserving of real happiness because one of the roles that I had, I guess, as the only child with my parents growing up in the middle of Nowheresville, where my mom didn't have her friends with her anymore, was that my parents argued an awful lot. And for the most part, it always went back to either being money, because all the money my father was making with his 2 and sometimes 3 jobs was going into the house that he wanted out in the middle of nowhere. And my mother didn't have any means of connecting with her friends anymore in person. She didn't drive. There was no second car, even if she did, to drive all the way, maybe 20 miles into the city to visit her friends. And so when they would argue and all these hurt feelings would rise to the surface, I often felt that it was my role to somehow bring them back together again. So I remember, my mom would be in her bedroom watching her TV, and I would go to her and say, Dad probably meant this and that, and he didn't mean to hurt you. And then I would run down to the basement where my dad was working on, one of the things he brought home to repair for somebody. And I would talk to him, Mom feels this way because of such and such, and you should really be more understanding. And I go back and forth between the two. And I think to a large degree, I often felt that had I done a better job, they would have been happier together. Now, I should never have been in that position, and I assumed an adult role when I was a little kid. So, of course, I couldn't resolve their problems. Even if I were older, I couldn't resolve their problems. But you have to wonder sometimes, if people create their own misery because they take upon their shoulders the burden of responsibility for something that really isn't theirs. Of course, sometimes it is there, but I'm talking about, let's say in this instance, where we're dealing with people who had childhood experiences that they suffered through. Tennille says, well, we could get into original sin, and yeah, that's something I was thinking about as well, too. But I feel that Toni Morrison had a more personal message. Men can be users, and next, truly love. Okay. I'm not sure what you mean here. And next, truly love, just learn tricks to get what they want. Yes, sure. Women can also, though, I think, right, be users and manipulators to get what they want. But yes, you have a very good point. And little Elsie says, back in that era, it was expected that a woman got married and had children. So they often settled for that. They didn't marry for love, so they often ended up with a man that was just a provider. That's a very good point, little Elsie. Absolutely. That's right. Women weren't working outside of the home as they do now, or if they did, well, no, there were many women working outside of the home. Let me rephrase that. Perhaps not in middle class or upper class society, right? But certainly in lower class societies, women were always working, whether it was on the family farm or helping to run the local store or whatever the case was. But you're right, they had a very, very defined role. Role number one was you got married, you had children, you took care of the children, you took care of your husband, and if your husband had a business or had a farm, you helped him do that as well too. And they knew of nothing else, right? So they didn't have the luxury of saying no and holding off and marrying for love, right? Plus also in those days as well too, though, unless you lived in a big city, if you lived in smaller places, usually your options were, right, relegated to who people introduced you to, who you met at church, who you met at the community town hall, things like that, right? So pickings were much slimmer. So yeah, very, very sad. I mean, we're very blessed today that we have much more freedom in choosing someone we love and want to spend our lives with. Boone says, I agree with that. Men know the tricks, say the right words, etc. Yep. And Tania says, many women had no say in who they were married to and who they were married. That's right. These were also the days, right, of arranged marriages. That's true. Or marriages sometimes were even planned years in advance for socioeconomic reasons, right? Whether it was advancing a family or obtaining some sort of economic gain to provide for the family going into the future. And also many families were not able to then continue having their children living at home with them and providing for them as they grew up and became older. There were just either too many mouths to feed or it was too hard to feed them. So the women had the option of either being left at home and being called an old spinster or not getting married or marrying whoever came along. Hey. Chanel says, that's an excellent point, Little. If they could pay the bills, that was what counted. Right? If men could be a good provider. That's true. It's very sad to think about all of that emptiness, no? And loneliness, practical relationships, and then hopefully out of those practical relationships, loving bonds develop, but they're not necessarily there at the outset. Very, very different. Okay. So, Tennille asked a very good question over here. They're all good questions, but here's another good one. What does it mean that Nell's parents had rubbed down her sparkle to a dull glow? And what does it mean that Nell only really sparkled with Sula? And if I'm going too slow, guys, please, if you've got to go, tell me and let me know. Tennille shares, I myself married at 16. I wasn't pregnant, just encouraged to go out on my own, ASAP. That's right. And you were also not on your own, right? You were busy taking care of so many other people at the same time, too. I'm sure there was the thought and the hope that you would have another person to share in that with you to alleviate a little bit of the burden and make it easier and more comfortable, perhaps, as well. I mean, there was a lot on your shoulders. Moon says I was on my own at 17. Wow, that's very, very young also. Yeah. So again, what does it mean that Nell's parents had rubbed down her sparkle to a dull glow? And what does it mean that Nell only really sparkled with Sula? And to me, I think that means that Sula just kind of, especially initially, right? Or maybe even all the way along the way, I'd have to give that more thought, but accepted Nell for what she appeared to be, for who she was. as a person, and not, how she behaved, how she dressed, what house she lived in, that sort of a thing. So that must have certainly been very comforting for Nell, and then she just let her natural bubbly personality come out. And Tennille says age has little to do with life experience. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, and Boone agrees with that. I do too. Yeah. There are many people, right, who are going around middle age or older, and they seem to behave rather immaturely, particularly emotionally. And then you see a lot of very old souls at very young ages because of their life experiences, right? So, how does Nell's relationship with Jude affect her and Sula's relationship? Now, this is interesting, right? Because Sula felt that, as Tennille pointed out in her video, that she and Nell had always shared everything. But clearly there seems to be a bit of a shift here with Nell's feelings towards the situation, right? Nell now has somebody that she needs to care for all of the time, somebody to support and lift up. And that puts her in a much more, so it would seem, powerful position of having real influence over another. Whereas I don't know that she ever felt that kind of an influence over Sula. I don't know. What do you ladies think? And then how do we think Nell's relationship with Sula affected Jude? That the two of them were so close together and shared everything. Did Jude feel perhaps somehow left out, or that he was playing second fiddle to Sula? That Nell was more interested in Sula than him? Tennille says, I think it means that Nell was tamed by her parents, but still a bit of herself, a bit feral, when she was with Sula. Yep, okay, that's right. That's very good. So does anybody have a comment on what you think Nell's relationship, let me go back and read this again. How do we think Nell's relationship with Sula affected Jude? Anybody have thoughts on that? And Voon shares some parents don't just don't let their own children shine. That's very true. Yeah, it's sort of like the children are supposed to be a reflection of the parent, right? Kind of like when people see the children, it's like, oh, they did a great job with their children, or look, so-and-so is so pretty, or so bright, or so capable, or talented in sports, whatever it may be. Mom and dad are doing a great job. It's like the child is sort of like almost like an appendage, if you will, that just brings more appreciation or adulation to the parents, as opposed to the child being a person in their own right. And Voon says over here, this question makes me wonder why the 10-year gap. Yeah, that's going to be very interesting. Tennille says, I think Jude didn't understand their relationship and dismissed it out of hand. It certainly was a very different and unusual relationship, no? Lil Aussie said she had to act a certain way with her parents, but with Sula, she could be her true self. Right? That's very true. And many people crave that, right? Just to know that they can be themselves no matter what, that somebody is going to appreciate them for who they are without the, appearances that go along with certain behaviors that maybe the parents expect. So then Tennille brings up something really interesting over here. She says, what is the significance of the Dewey's arrested physical and mental development? And why does this realization occur at the wedding? Why at this point in time? Because clearly if they were arrested in their physical development, let's say they were all shorter and not growing taller, and if they were all rather immature, playing the same games that they had done when they were much younger. This would not be like a new thing that would just pop out of the blue. Like, let's say somebody coming home with having dyed their hair blue, right? This is something that could have been observed all along the way. So why does this realization happen to occur at the wedding? What's going on at this point in time in our narrative here? So Voon shares, who would really understand their relationship, the secrets, what is to come next? I am so curious about Nell and Sula. Yes, especially now with Jude in the mix, right? He's going to really sort of like, what do you call it? Stir the basket? No, not stir the basket. That doesn't sound right. Oh, well, there's some expression out there. Hopefully somebody will know what I mean. Tennille says, yes, and with Sula, she wasn't judged, right? Whereas Nell was probably always being judged on the home front. Maybe she was always checked over. Are you clean? Are you this? Are you that? You know, have you done up all your buttons? Are you sitting properly at the table? Are you using the right fork? You name it, right? So Voon agrees, says, yes. Lousy says, exactly. Now, I don't know how this is pronounced. Nil? Nini? I really don't know. Somebody one day, Tennille, you're going to have to say it on a video for me. So I know, or Lousy, maybe you can type it out. Is it nil? I've never heard that expression before. Maybe that's sort of like a diminutive for some term of endearment where you are. I don't know. Or is it more like Nini, like N-E-E? I'm just curious. I'm sorry. So Tennille says maybe it was a metaphor for the dysfunction in Eva's house. Could very well be. Certainly there's a lot of dysfunction in so many areas over here, no? Excuse me. Excuse me, I'm sorry. That was a yawn. I apologize for that. I'm trying to find the next question in all of these questions over here, guys. I am going to put numbers, I think, next time so I can keep better track of it. Okay, next question. What do you think amused Sula as she was leaving Nell's wedding? Why do you think the girls didn't keep in touch after the wedding? They had been so close, right? So what had happened over here? So Lil Elsie is saying nil like nil. So it's nil. I don't know that expression. It's very interesting. I'm going to have to look that up. That's really interesting. Tula. Sorry, Tennille says the comparison of Sula and Nell at the wedding shows the different paths that their lives will take. The stunted Deweys show in contrast to healthily raised children. Very, very good point. Yeah, in a way here, right, that we're seeing sort of like Nell is really, literally and figuratively settling down, right? And she really is settling down, not only in marrying and okay, she's going to have her household of her own, but she's settling down in the sense that she is deigning to marry somebody who she's really kind of like only attracted or attached to because this person is needy and damaged and she thinks there's something she can rescue and fix over here. It's not out of real, true emotional connection and love, right? So she's settling for something that is not the ultimate of what happily married life should be like, you know? And yet at the same time, we see Sula's gaily and happily going out of the wedding and she's heading off somewhere else. Because Sula is going to be taking off in another direction. She's not going to settle in the same sense that Nell is clearly doing over here. Tennille says, nil is a term of endearment all my kids call me. Oh, interesting. I'd love it if one day you could... Oh, it's short for Tennille, nil. Ah, now I get it. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It kind of reminds me, one of the nicknames that our younger son, Shalom, had for his brother when they were very little, we always called them like by their Hebrew names at home. So Shmuel, whose English name translates into Samuel. So like he calls himself for many people now on the job, Sam, because it's easier for them. But so little Shalom was trying to say his brother's name, which was Shmuel Simcha, and we would say Shmuli to make it easier. And he couldn't do the Uli, so he would call him Ui. So even now, sometimes it's, hey, Ui, what you up to, you know? So, okay, Nil. That's very sweet. Thank you. Tennille says, yes, she is settling, and Sula is not settling. That's right. Boone says her keyboard froze up. That happens. That really does happen. Glad you're with us, though. All right, let me go back and find the next question. Well, let's go back to this for a second, right? Because what do you think amused Sula as she was leaving Nell's wedding? Okay, so maybe Sula was amused by the fact that, oh, here's Nell. She's going to be settling for something. And Sula's amused because she's thinking, hey, girlfriend, I'm not doing that. I ain't settling. But at the same time, why do we think the girls didn't keep in touch after the wedding, right? They had been so close. They had shared so many life experiences. I mean, just think of the experience with Chicken Little, for goodness sake, right? So why didn't they keep in touch? So maybe it's a question here that Sula doesn't share with anybody where she's off to so that they can write and be in touch. Or is it more than that? Did they really not want to put in the effort to keep up with one another? And if so, why is that? Is that because they're taking such divergent paths? They feel, they don't need each other anymore? Or they don't want to have an influence on one another any longer? Boone shares, it is like Sula knew that her life would be quite different. So do you think she didn't want a part of Nell's life anymore? She didn't want any of, let's say, Nell's settling, rubbing off on her? Little Lousy says, okay, still listening, but got my coffee. Got to hit the road again. Love to all. Mwah. Love to you, Little Lousy. Nice to have you here with us. Hope you have a great day and a fantastic week. So glad you've been joining us. And once again, that smooch there was for you. Okay, sweetheart? So glad you're here with us. You take good care of yourself, honey bunch. So does anybody have any thoughts of why the girls, Sula and Nell, didn't keep in touch after the wedding? What was going on over there? Did Nell now have a new project that, she could focus her attentions onto? Was she somehow afraid that if they shared everything, Sula would want to share her husband too? Okay, Boone is saying, be safe, little lousy. Tennille says, take care, little, love you, sugar, drive carefully. Oh, that's very sweet. Tennille's saying, I think Sula is amused by the whole concept of marriage and didn't realize what a big change it is and how Nell's focus would shift. Right, but at the same time, why did Sula choose this particular time then to venture off on her own and leave, right? Did she feel if there was no friendship in its traditional sense with Nell, there was nothing for her in bottom? Or was she going on to show, hey, I can do the same as you, girlfriend, or I can do better? I'm not going to settle. I'm going to be happier. What was that all about? Why did she decide to leave at that time? And little Lousy Eden says, be safe, little Lousy. Heart emoji. That's very sweet. Yeah, I'm curious about that. I think there's a lot going on there. Why they didn't bother to keep in touch. Did they each think that the other had fulfilled their purpose in their life? Were they also, in many regards, they've seen emulated in so many relationships around them? Have they been using one another to fill something? And now Nell's going to fill it with Jude, and Sula's going to go off and fulfill her needs with new experiences. Okay, and what do you think is the significance of the mention of birds in the final sentence of the chapter 1927, where it says, It would be 10 years before they saw each other again, and their meeting would be thick with birds. That is really very interesting. You know, when I think of the expression thick with birds, what that calls to mind for me, considering where they're living out in the country, is that when there is, you know, an animal that's, let's say, unfortunately deceased, either God forbid roadkill or it's died of natural causes, let's say out in the field, there will be certain birds who will gather, right, to pick at the remnants because they're scavengers. And when things are falling apart and, you know, dying as it were, literally or figuratively, they will be there to tear it to pieces, pick it apart. So this is what comes to mind when I hear that it would be 10 years before they saw each other again, and their meeting would be thick with birds. So Tennille says, Sula's experience with relationships is casual, and I don't think she expected Neil to abandon their friendship for her marriage. Right? Okay. And Boone shares they have a bond, so it will be interesting to see what happens. Yeah, well, 10 years apart is quite significant, isn't it? So, does anybody have a comment they want to share? With this very interesting language at the end of the chapter, or at the end of 1927, it would be 10 years before they saw each other again, and their meeting would be thick with birds. So Tennille shares that birds are an omen that portends change, and usually in a negative way. Interesting. I'm glad that you know so much about these things, Tennille. I really have no clue. Excuse me. I'd be curious, is that like all birds in general, or more typically certain types of birds? Like, I don't know, let's say if one had the vision of a flock of flamingos, let's say, in that dream, would that have as negative a connotation, let's say, as, what do they call it? A murder of ravens? I think that's the plural for a group of ravens. Or let's say crows or buzzards or something like that. Or if you saw, let's say, lovebirds in your dream, would it also have a bad omen? It's just the idea that birds imply something negative coming? I really don't know. Birds also represent being watched. Interesting. So I can certainly see how the girls and how they interact with one another after a 10-year separation. They would be watched by everybody in their neighborhood, right? Everybody in Bottom would be curious to see, hey, what's with Nell and Sula? How are they going to get on now? What's changed? What hasn't? Boone shares the bond from their childhood will keep them together no matter when they see each other again. Things happen and only the two of them know. And Tennille shares that many native cultures believe spirits of the dead can communicate with birds or through birds. Very interesting. I find the traditions and the beliefs of different cultures from around the world to be truly, truly fascinating. It's certainly something I'd be interested in learning more about. And certainly the imagery shared over here is very, very dramatic. And Boone, I hear what you're saying. The bond from their childhood will keep them together no matter when they see each other again. Things happen and only the two of them know. Yeah, this is interesting you're bringing this up. Here again, I'm going to share from my personal life for 1 second, then I'll be quiet. But I had a best friend from the age of 6 until 17. And we sort of parted on not the best of terms at high school graduation. But here and there throughout the years, even though she moved to a different province, to Ontario, 2-hour drive away from here in Montreal, We would speak to each other very sporadically over the years, but I mean, really, like a year or 2 or 3 years or 4 could go by before we would speak on the phone once again. But more recently, we've improved that relationship, and so I made arrangements with her that I'm going to drive out to Ontario middle of August and pick her up. She wants to tour Montreal. She doesn't want to go see where we both grew up because she had an unhappy childhood as well too. But she's going to come. I'm going to take her around Montreal, show her the spots she wants to see, and then she's going to come here for dinner. And it's interesting because when we talk with one another on the phone, or even let's say through Facebook Messenger, that connection is still over there, even though there has been such a difference in our lives, in the paths we chose to follow, in our religious observances. I'm just curious to see how it's going to actually play out with Nell and Sula. Excuse me, if they will still have that same close connection, or if there are going to be real shifts in their relationship as a result of going off in very different paths. Many relationships can survive that, some can't. So I'm really curious to see what's going to happen. Danielle shares, crows can represent lies or broken promises. Owls can represent secrets and protection. Interesting. And Danielle says, I don't know any more offhand, but you certainly do know quite a few. That's very, very interesting. And Boone shares, I have heard of that before. And Tennille says, that's cool. I'm glad I will get to see your friend. Yeah, that'll be very nice. I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a bittersweet reunion in that we parted on such, not bad terms, but not nice terms, because we had both had such like sad experiences during our youth and adolescence, and I imagine the getting together again will bring some of that to the fore, but hopefully we can heal them together now also and help each other, so that'll be nice. But yeah, that is very interesting to Neil, that crows can represent lies or broken promises, and owls can represent secrets and protection. Very interesting. I certainly would like to learn more about that. I don't know if I'd ever mentioned it before. The only thing that I had, or that I recall learning when I was younger, was that the land that my father bought had been on a very, very large French-Canadian farm that had been in the family for I think about 300 years or so, like from the mid-1600s. And the family had, of course, interacted with the natives that had been living in the area at that time. And so the matriarch of the family, she had 10 children, would tell me when I was littler that particularly in the fall and winter, that if you looked up and you saw a moon and the moon had sort of like this hazy white halo around it, that meant that there was a very large snowfall coming. And that used to get me so excited when I was waiting for the snow, that I would peek out whenever there was a moon to try to figure out, is it coming? Is it coming? Okay. Thank you for listening to me, guys. Hopefully next time you'll chat more in the chat and I'll talk less. But okay, so that was the last question I had from Tennille, the one about the very ominous meeting that their reunion is going to be thick with birds. And so unless somebody else wants to just say something or chat a bit, it's going on now almost midnight EST. So I know that's 11 p.m. for you, Tennille. For you, Voon, I know it's midnight. It shows me here that there's a fourth person, Eden. That would be coming on, 2 p.m. if you're still here with us, dear. So if somebody has something to share, whether it's about this or something else, that would be really great. Tennille says, that's fascinating. You're very sweet, Tennille. You're very, very sweet. I certainly loved growing up in the country. I miss it in so many ways. I wish that was something I could have shared with my boys. Yet, on the other hand, I'm very grateful that they grew up here in the city in a nice neighborhood where they had lots of kids their own age to play with who spoke their same language. The school was nearby, so they could walk there with their friends and walk home when they were older. You know, I mean, they're toss-ups, right? No matter what we decide in life. Eden, almost 2 p.m. Yes, I'm glad it's early afternoon for you, Eden. It's wintertime for you, I think, isn't it? I don't know what it's like in Australia in terms of the kind of snowfall you get over there. Do you get any at all, or is it just cooler temperatures? I really have so much to learn about so many things. And you know what? I think that's one of the most exciting things about life. You know, when we're little, we have this thought that, oh, we're going to grow up and then we're going to know everything. And then at some point, when we're an adult, we realize, oh my gosh, I really don't know much at all. I need to learn a lot. And then eventually we'll get comfortable with that. We can say, I know quite a bit about a few things, and there's so much more I want to learn about. And that's really exciting because that curiosity keeps you going along the way. You know, that there's always something new to discover, whether about yourself, about other people. Tennille says, Stephen King uses bird symbolism in his work a lot. Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example. I can't at the moment, but speaking of Stephen King, I don't know if any of you have Netflix at all. I had started, we don't have a TV at home. So our boys at some point, when they were littler, showed them the Magic School Bus and Arthur and some National Geographic and documentary type things like that. So eventually we allowed them to get Netflix later on. And so I discovered that they had like a TV series on there that which was inspired by Stephen King's novella called The Mist. And I got so into this series. I was like binge watching it when I wasn't feeling great. And come to the end of season 1, and that's it. The show was never renewed because it didn't have enough interest from other people. And I was thinking, oh no, now I've got to find that novella and read it because, I mean, I can't not know what happens. Eden says, I love listening to you talk. You are a sweetheart, Eden. That's very, very kind of you to say. Mwah. And that one's for you. I don't know why I'm looking. I'm looking at the microphone. It's getting to me looking at the camera. There we go. That's better. Thank you for saying something so sweet. Neil says the dark half is full of birds in it. I was thinking of it. I can't remember where the birds are. The dark half I've never read. I don't know if that's a short story or novella. I certainly have to do a lot more reading with that one. Tennille says the beginning of wisdom is I don't know. Yeah, that's very, very true. Boone says, oh, it bums me out when that happens, Leah. Yeah. What can we do? At least this series I was grateful is based on something that I can hopefully find in my library or pick up if I have to on Amazon, and then I can find out how it ends. Because the worst thing is to be sort of like left with a cliffhanger and you're interested in the characters and what's going on, and then whoop, that's it. Plug pulled. Nothing happening. Tennille says that is a creepy story, but it's super short. I think it's in different seasons. Okay, I'm going to take a look for that, Tennille. Thank you very much. So I don't want to keep anybody over here. I thank you, ladies, for joining me and for joining Tennille and Yoon and Eden. It was nice to have you, Little Lousy. I don't know if you're still listening in or not, but I'm grateful to have everybody here. I thank everyone again for your patience with me last week when I wasn't feeling great. I am learning how to manage with my smaller stomach right now, what I can eat, what I can't. So I hope that's not going to happen once again. I'm being much more careful. Tennille says, the giant bird that attacked the young Mike at the old ironworks. Yeah, you see, I can't remember that. My memory is sometimes spotty. That's one thing about your memory, Tennille. Thank God, and I hope you have it forever, that you can remember such details, certainly with the Golden Girls and with the books that you're reading as well, too, whereas I will remember, let's say, certain snippets, and the rest is just gone unless I go back and I refresh myself. Boone says, as always, such an awesome host. Thank you so much, even though I did some coughing and some sniffling. Tennille, your amazing questions. Yeah, I love Tennille's questions. And Eden, it was so nice to have you participating more today in the chat. with your commentary. I really love that. You bring up such great points. Thank you so much. And Tennille, you're so sweet. Thank you for being such a gracious hostess. Tennille, thank you for creating this wonderful book club for us, and for the terrific videos you create for us, and for those very thought-provoking questions and the insights that you share as well too. You really do get me thinking. And I'm often very glad that your videos with the comments are posted in advance, because then I can give a lot more thought to my interpretation of events before we have the live stream. So I appreciate that. You're very kind, Tennille. Big applause to everybody over here. Eden, thank you for the heart. We're sending you lots of love, sweetie. I wish you a great rest of your day and a wonderful week, sweetie. And Voon, the same to you as well, too. Tennille, also to you. Thank you, ladies, so much for being here. And we'll be back again next Monday night. You all have a blessed week, and I'll say bye for now. If anybody thinks of anything after the fact, please, you can either just drop a comment to this when the live stream is posted to YouTube, or in the About page are Tennille's in my emails. Please be in touch anytime you want to about anything at all. That would be terrific. Good night. God bless everybody. Stay well. Be safe. Take good care, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.